What is the single biggest mistake consumers make when buying or selling a home? We're about to find out in this week's Realty Rant with Vince Arcuri and Victoria McGuire from Cooperative Real Estate. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
We've been warned. This segment could go on for a while. We're warning our producers this morning because this is a hot topic.
I think Florida has one of the most confusing laws, and the problem with it is consumers are supposed to know this. And I'm finding that 99% of the people that are watching this are not aware of the fact. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about how is your real estate agent representing you or not representing you? Most consumers, they assume that the real estate agent that they hire is loyal to them, that they've got a fiduciary responsibility to represent them in the highest level. But in Florida, it's very unique. If you don't ask your real estate agent how you're being represented and they don't bring it up, you are assuming this transactional or neutral relationship with your real estate brokerage.
So there's two different ways you can be represented.
Right.
What are those two different ways? What are the answers that we need to be looking for?
Well, there's two. It's called transaction broker, and then there's a single agent. So the transaction broker is the one that we're assumed to be unless you ask. If you do ask, you can be represented as a single agent, and then you have additional duties that are required of the agent from you of confidentiality and loyalty and obedience. So it's a completely different
So
level.
what are the percentage rate? I mean, are there generally more of one than the other?
That's a good question. I would say that probably 95% of the people that are listing and buying real estate are assuming they're being represented by their real estate agent, and they are not. They're under this transaction broker thing. To me, I think in most states, the first thing a real estate agent has to do is disclose to a particular client, how do you want me to represent you, or this is how I'm going to represent you. And Florida, as far as I know, is the only state where it's just zip it, don't mention it to them, and if they don't ask and you don't tell, they're assuming this neutral. And what that means basically is the agent that you just listed your home with is no more loyal to you than they are the buyer. They cannot show favoritism for you to the buyer that's purchasing your home.
Yeah, I have an issue with that.
I think most people would. We try to educate everybody here on the show.
So where does that problem lie then? If you don't know if this happens, I'm imagining quite a bit, where's the issue? Where do the problems come up later if you are misinformed?
Well, there's pros and cons. I think Victoria was talking about, just tell about the example that we were talking about earlier.
I mean, there are pros and cons to both. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be represented as, a transaction broker. That means basically they're working for the transaction. They're trying to make it work for both sides, but they are neutral. They cannot disclose to you, for example, if the buyer was willing to pay a little bit more money, they can't.
Well, that's my biggest issue is if I know what my the highest I can go at, I don't necessarily want my agent saying what my high point is.
Yeah, I could get, this in a everyday example. I mean, you can't be any more loyal to the other person. So if you know that buyer would pay a little bit more and the seller's willing to accept it, and you're a transaction broker, you're just going to sit there and watch that person sign that document knowing that they're leaving money on the table. As a single agent, we're able to go in and go, wait a minute, I think you're leaving money on the table. I think we should counter up. And we're able to give that advice because of the representation or duty to one particular person. And there's a lot more. It would be impossible to cover this on a 5-minute segment.
That's why we warned our producer this may go long.
And the takeaway on it that you're going to ask me is, I would say it's up to the consumer to ask, how are you representing me?
Like number one, that should be the first question out of the gate. That should be the first question out of their gate, and explain to me how that benefits me or doesn't. Because one of the things we had talked about offset before we were rolling, when you make that decision to hire a single agent, well, now you are now liable for everything that agent says. So if it's a new agent, maybe they're not that experienced and they give some false information, now you're liable, whereas a transaction broker actually protects you from that lawsuit. So there's pros and cons both ways. I like it. Thank you for educating us. Again, I think a lot of people are assuming. We all know what happens when we assume.
Ask questions.
Thank you both so much. We always love when you're here. We always learn so much. And if you want to see what else they've talked about, this is one of a lot of subjects we've talked about. Go to realtyrant.com. They post all their segments there. Also, pick up the phone, give them a call. They'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.